Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, May Angie Motsaha, and the Deputy Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, one of them, General Bantubonke Holomis. I did not know the other name, but I got it yesterday. And thank you for the moral support and for being there. And it's a good sign, Mama, that it means the briefings of the security cluster will be very fair if you are coming to the briefing. Dear colleagues and fellow South Africans, yesterday on Wednesday, the 3rd of July, 2024, South Africa witnessed another key milestone in the operationalization of the Government of National Unity, or GNU as is colloquially known, with the swearing in of the Deputy President of the Republic, ministers and deputy ministers from across the political parties which are signatories to the statement of intent of the GNU. Given the electoral outcome and the agreement to form a government of national unity, it was therefore no longer possible for the President to fulfill the undertaking he had previously made to reduce the number of portfolios in the National Executive. And we say this because there's been talk of a bloated National Executive. So in simple terms, the size of the National Executive is a result of our electoral outcomes with the need to be inclusive. In addition, the constitution of the National Executive had to be cognizant of other national interests such as the demographics of the country, geographic spread, youth, and gender representation. And the major question that as the media you have been trying to address, and you've been talking to designate ministers, and I learned that our constitution does not provide for designate ministers, so there was no such a thing as a designate minister. You have been dealing with a question of how will the Government of National Unity operate, including on policy issues. Allow me to borrow the words of President Ramaphosa of the 30th of June 2024 when he was announcing the appointments he had made to the National Executive. I quote, "The establishment of the GNU in its current form is unprecedented in the history of our democracy," close quote. And he had also clarified on the same day that, I quote, "The GNU would be bound by certain fundamental principles and would undertake a basic minimum program of priorities as articulated in the statement of intent." As the head of the National Executive, the President exercises the executive authority of the Republic together with other members of the Cabinet. And members of the Cabinet are only ministers. Deputy ministers are not members of Cabinet. They are members of what is called the National Executive. We realized during these elections and during the period in between that the South African media does not understand how the government of South Africa and what the Constitution provides for. So that's why we clarify that part. So the President has two roles. He's the executive authority of the Republic, but he's also the head of state. So we are now talking about his role as the executive authority of the state. And that is derived from Section 85(2) of the Constitution, where he exercised his executive authority together with other members of the Cabinet. In this regard, the President with the Cabinet is responsible for, and I'm quoting directly as from the Constitution, implementing national legislation unless the Constitution or an Act of Parliament provides otherwise. 2, developing and implementing national policy. So the national policies are not of individual ministers but of Cabinet. 3, coordinating the functions of the state departments and administrations. 4, preparing and initiating legislation. And 5, performing any other executive function provided for in the Constitution or in national legislation. If I have to be pedantic, what I was naming as 1 to 5 in the Constitution, it's A to E. The phrase of "as the head of Cabinet" provided for in the Constitution captures the idea of collective responsibility, but it also allows the Cabinet and the President to determine the way and procedures by which they work together, including leaving certain matters or kinds of matters to be dealt with by a single member of cabinet, meaning a minister. Therefore, if a matter is not a routine matter or departmentally specific matter or function, it must first be referred to cabinet, as must all matters that cabinet itself has decided should come to it. In general, if a matter is not a routine matter, it must be referred to the cabinet for its consideration by way of a cabinet memorandum, what in any day language you'll call a submission. It should be stressed that both the President and individual ministers are duty-bound to take the cabinet issues of policy, significant decisions, such as decisions with financial consequences exceeding a department's approved budget, and any other matter the cabinet has decided should be referred to it. They must take those matters to cabinet. Failure to do so could undermine the validity of such a decision. So there is no single minister who can expropriate a decision of cabinet, or that is a policy decision, to themselves, because then that policy will not be valid in terms of the laws of the Republic, as indicated earlier, as provided for in the Constitution. This envisages that the President himself may determine that a President's minute refer to him for signature, because when you want decision of the President, more in particular those that have not gone to cabinet, they are done through a President's minute. For signature should in fact go to the cabinet. So the President, you can even submit a cabinet minute and then he says it must go to cabinet. Accordingly, he can either refer it back to the minister to take the matter to cabinet, that is the respective minister. This is an approach which is accepted by cabinet as its way of acting together with the President when he exercises his executive authority under the Constitution. And then the next question will be, given that you are a GNU, how are we going to set government priorities and the program of action that are articulated as articulated in the statement of intent? The government's priorities and program of action is articulated in the medium-term strategic framework, what we colloquially call the MTSF, which is guided by the election manifesto of the governing party. In this case of the GNU, it will be governing parties. And the choice of priorities, because there will be multiple priorities in the manifestos of the parties or the governing party or the governing parties in our instance, is guided by their alignment to the attainment of the goals of the National Development Plan or Vision 2030 as adopted by Parliament in 2012. As a country in 2012, we adopted the National Development Plan, which was widely consulted, and it came to Parliament for adoption, and we said this is our plan to deliver a better South Africa for all by 2030 with set targets. That plan, and later the United Nations developed the Sustainable Development Goals that are closely linked to that plan. So as we implement the NDP, we're also implementing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, commonly known as the SDGs. And to give effect to the signed statement of intent as signed by the parties to the GNU, the Forum of South African Directors General, commonly known as FOSAD, which is chaired by the Director General in the Presidency, have undertaken work of analyzing the manifestos of the parties to the GNU and will submit a proposal for consideration and adoption at the Cabinet Lekgotla, scheduled for next Thursday until next Friday, which is 11 and 12 of July 2024. The adopted program of action, which will be then the MTSF, will be announced by the President at the opening of Parliament on July 18th, 2024. After the adoption of the MTSF, the individual departments will then develop the strategic plans linked to the MTSF and their annual performance plans for implementation of both the strategic plans and the MTSF targets. Departments present both their strategic plans and annual performance plans to Parliament for oversight and adoption through what we call departmental budgets. The National Treasury will fund the implementation of the MTSF through the national budget that is also tabled and approved by Parliament I've just forgotten to insert the date for the 2024 budget speech that will be tabled then in Parliament. The Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, or colloquially known as DPME, is responsible for overseeing and reporting on the implementation of the MTSF, which is the Consolidated Government View Performance, and the annual performance plans of departments, and submit the reports of alignment and performance to both the President and the Cabinet. So when we have adopted the plans, we just don't merely say, go on your own and do as you please. There's a department that oversees that plans that the departments have done are aligned to the MTSF as agreed. Because in particular now that we're in a GNU, what we all collectively agree as a program of action is not a program of action of the ANC, of the DA, of the UDM, of the PA, or any other party to the GNU, but the program of action of government. We are collectively responsible for implementing that program of action. There's also a need to clarify when did the appointed ministers become ministers, because we have been speaking, we've been making pronouncements on policies, we have been, some of us who have been saying we're not consulted on which department get to which party, so forth. So let me clarify that the ministers of the 6th administration ceased to be ministers on Wednesday, 19th June 2024, when the president of the 7th administration took oath of office. If you'll recall, he completed his oath of office just before 11:30, and at that moment we stopped being ministers of the 6th administration. The powers, all the executive authority powers, moved back to the single executive authority, which is the president, because all of us as ministers, we've got what we call delegated executive authority powers. That's why the president can change the configuration and portfolios and say, you have this responsibility, you don't have this, because those are his powers as per the Constitution. And he was exercising those powers supported by the directors general of departments. So no minister of the 6th administration could make a pronouncement or a commitment or sign anything after the oath of office was taken on the 19th of June. Similarly, ministers of the 7th administration only assumed office yesterday, the 3rd of July 2024, when they took their oath of office. Consequently, the priorities of the 7th administration are only going to be adopted at the scheduled Lekgotla next week, Thursday and Friday, and ministers will be using the period between now and the Lekgotla to receive briefings from the departments and consult on how to shape the direction of the discussions at the Lekgotla. So whoever said this is the policy I'm going to implement, no. Whoever says this is the priority I'm going to implement, no. Those decisions will only be taken at the Lekgotla. They can say those are the things they're going to debate and engage at the Lekgotla for that prioritization. But as already indicated, the directors general have done work and continue to do work, and that's why we say ministers must use this period to consult with their directors generals and their departments on the prioritization, so that if they feel they have to drive a particular priority from the manifesto of the party that has deployed them into parliament, because we can only be deployed into parliament and the president then decides who to invite into cabinet. Then they must then do that through their directors generals who are drafting and reviewing what has been proposed in the documents. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you, and then I'll be ready to take questions.